Welcome back, baseball fans, to the 1970 to 73 carryover league. It is early, but we're getting started with some off-season maneuvers. We got a first look at all the rosters and moves to be made before the draft. Any teams want to make some deals, we can get started with some deals. We talked about we didn't have deals last year because we had an exodus of 1980s players, but now we have the proper off-season where teams are looking to keep 4, waive 2, and retire 2 players. And when we look at the total number of players, every time I've done an elimination video that you've seen, there has been 8 guys adjusted for a keeper, waiver, or retiree. And the magic number to get is 4 keepers, 2 waivers, and 2 retires. Let's find a team, if I can, that starts perfectly. Okay, here's one, Cleveland. So Cleveland wants to keep Tony Horton, Duke Sims, Vicente Romo, Eddie Watt. They want to put Dave Marshall on waivers and Mike McCormick on waivers. They have to have cards in 1970 to do that, and we've checked that they do. And they want to retire Ron Davis and Ray Washburn. That's the perfect number of 40202 that all teams have to get. Now, I'm going to go back up to the grand total, and that is if simply, you've got 40,202. And the reason I do it this way is so that if you draw a line after every 2 digits, you get an accumulation of everybody's keeper, waivers, and retires. So the grand total, before anything is done, is 132, 60, 64. That's 8 players of 32 teams. That's their current status. Let's start from the right side and move back to the left. We have 64 retirees. It doesn't mean each team has 2, but a grand total of 64. That's fantastic news because it's perfect. That's what we want exactly, 64. That means we don't have to move keepers into retiree column or waivers into retiree column. We got the precise number. All we have to do is move, I'll show you here for a second, going back to a team that's maybe imperfect in retirees. Boston only has 1 retiree, so then they need to add 1. Toronto has 3 guys, 1, 2, 3. They need to subtract 1. That's the general idea of the trade carousel. So, the retirees are perfect, and even more perfect is that, going to the left side, we need to have 128 keepers. That's 4 keepers and 32 teams. And we have 132. What this says is 4 keepers need to go on waivers, which is a good thing. That means that 4 quality players are going to go on waivers, added to the 60 in this middle number to get to 64, and they're going to be of quality because that team wanted to keep them. So it's a net movement of 4 players from the blue column as keepers into the yellow column, the waivers. The net for the whole league. That's it. But it's not always that easy because all teams have to get down to the precise number of 40202. So how is this done? How does the carousel start? Well, what I do is I've already calculated the draft order for next year. And that is here. Let's go to the bottom. New York Mets won the World Series. They picked 32nd. Detroit was a runner-up in the World Series. They picked 31st. Your LCLS runner-ups are 30th and 29th. Divisional round there, and the wild card round there. So there's your 12 playoff teams. And then you have the next near misses. And that the top 8 draft pick teams are the 8 fourth place teams ranked in winning percentage, which means that the Cleveland Indians had the worst record in baseball and they get the first pick in the draft. Also, I look a little closer into the winning percentage order. I do the 8 fourth place teams, then the next 12, then the playoff teams. But I also tweak it to make sure that each league doesn't pick more than twice in a row. I wish the NFL did that. Sometimes you see in the NFL you could have division rivals going back to back to back perhaps. So you have to have only 2 teams in a league back to back. In looking at the order, we alternate in a good manner. Cleveland, American League, Colorado National League, Toronto American, Chicago National, San Diego National, Texas American, Atlanta National, Milwaukee American, Ohio American, but then Arizona National. The Expos American, St. Louis, and Florida National, the White Sox in the American League. Pittsburgh gets bumped up to 15th, which is great news for them, with a .459 winning percentage because they're a National League team. Seattle actually goes beneath Pittsburgh, even though we know they're better because they got lucky and won more games near the end. Then you have Philadelphia, who also isn't as good as Pittsburgh, but they got hot in the tournament. The Yankees, Portland, Minnesota, and then we have, of course, the playoff teams. And so, in this column, I call it the end of 2021, the opening keeper, waiver, retire numbers are right here. I copied them in here. And then you do the summation at the very bottom, and you get the same number, 1326064. So what I do to start, and I started with the first 8 scenarios, I permitted the teams to put players on the trade carousel and look for trade partners. Interestingly, the first team on the clock was Cleveland, who didn't want to make a move. They're happy with the guys they want to keep, waive, and retire. That's fine. But the next teams, Colorado, Toronto, the Cubs, San Diego, and Texas, are the ones to analyze tonight as to what they did in the trade carousel. So let's take a look at the moves that were made to begin this carousel. Colorado, at 40301, simply needed to gain a retiree and lose a waiver guy. And the team they traded with would turn out to be, usually the teams at the bottom trade with the teams at the top. And the team they traded with is Detroit. Let's take a look at the trades. So the first trade, Colorado traded their waived third baseman, Sid O'Brien, to Detroit for their retired third baseman, Kevin Collins. No tokens involved, as first of all, none of these guys are keepers, and secondly, they don't have high value. So I didn't involve any tokens as trade equalizer. So after this trade is made, Colorado goes to the proper number 40202, and this is the fixed column. And this is what we have to fix before we go to the draft. So Colorado is fixed. When I go down to Detroit, they're also fixed. Next team on the clock was Toronto. And here is a big, big trade. I think it's a big trade. So, the big trade is that Toronto, the green are active players. The red is a player about to be retired, and a blue is a keeper, a guy who is going to be in the draft. Toronto returns Gary Gentry to the New York Mets and a retired Rod Gasper. The Mets send Bill Zepp, we talked about him in the World Series. He was their 8th pitcher, a guy acquired in the token round, to Toronto, and as to balance out the starting pitching in the trade. But they send Tommy A.G. to Toronto, and the Mets get a token because of having to trade Tommy A.G. Now let's take a look at why Tommy A.G. was traded. When we go to the end of year for the Mets, we find that they were in the predicament of having the 5 keepers of Tommy A.G., Jerry Grody, Cleon Jones. That's not going to happen. That word trade changed my mind. Tom Seaver and Jerry Kuzman. Now, there are certain absolutes that just aren't going to change. Seaver and Kuzman are keepers. Grote's a keeper, and Cleon Jones was your team MVP, and he's really good in 1971, whereas Tommy A.G.'s last good year is 1970. So you'll end up getting 2 more good Cleon Jones years instead of 1 more Tommy A.G. So the Mets, in a bittersweet, had to make a deal with one of these 5 guys, and it's A.G. So there was 3 criteria that the Mets used in making this deal. 1, trade him to the other league. 2, trade him to a team you're not like to play in the World Series, like the Toronto Blue Jays. And 3, trade him to a team that could help knock out teams in that division. So AG goes to Toronto to become probably their best player, and he will hopefully help the Mets and watch Toronto beat up on the Orioles, the Red Sox, and the Yankees. So that is the reason, and they get a draft token to the Mets, and of course they get Gary Gentry back. So it's a big trade for a World Championship team losing their Gold Glove center fielder, but that's what happens to World Championship teams. They were loaded to begin with, and they just can't stay loaded forever. That's why we have to be competitive. That's why the lower teams, Toronto, need a helping hand every once in a while. And the Mets are going to help Toronto because it realizes it helps them anyway. All right, next, let's go to the next transaction. So this also helps Toronto's math become perfect at 40202. And the Mets' math is 40202, and they're ready to go. Congratulations, Mets. In one move, they set up their off season. The Cubs were next. They needed to get rid of a retired player. They got on the phone with the Giants, who needed to get rid of a waived player. And the trade was a relief pitcher trade. The Cubs sent Cecil Upshaw to the Giants for Frank Lindsay. Now, the color scheme is, this should be the other way here. The team names are the same, but the color schemes are wrong. So the Cubs get their waived guy, and the Giants get Upshaw. These are the players. The team sends that guy to this team for that guy. So the Cubs send a retired player. Let's go back to this again. The Cubs send a retired player to the Giants for a waived player. Okay. Right. So Frank Lindsay has a little bit of value as a waived player versus retired player, but because they're not going to retain him and the value is marginal, just like this trade up here, no tokens are involved. And we get a lot of, like I said before, when we start out so solid with our general overall accounting, we're going to get a lot of transactions between waiver and retired players that are just going to be incidental trades that don't really have a big impact and don't require tokens to balance the trade. So with that, the Cubs are 40202 and they're set to go. And the Giants are the same way. And again, you're seeing a team at the top and the bottom making a deal. Next up, the Padres. They start at 50201. They have a keeper, and they need to get a retired player. So this is probably going to involve a token. And let's see who the Padres trade partner was. All right, the Padres traded with Las Vegas. The active players moved. Tony Cloninger is a starting pitcher, but he only pitches on 4 days rest. Tom Dukes is a relief pitcher. So the Vegas adds a reliever. Padres add a starter. But the movement in the trade was that Jim Bunning, the 5th keeper of the Padres, goes to Las Vegas for the retired player Ken Johnson. I didn't put any tokens in this particular trade because I looked at the value of Jim Bunning. And I saw that he only has 1 year left, and it's not particularly great anyway. And I didn't want to penalize a token to an expansion team like Las Vegas. They need all the help they can get. No reason to inflate San Diego's token total. And the reason why Vegas wants bunning is that Vegas needs innings pitched. When we look at Las Vegas, who made the playoffs last year, only Blue Moon Odom could pitch on 3 days rest, and when he comes back as a keeper, he won't be able to do that. And so you have Fryman and none of these other guys pitch a lot of innings. What we like about Jim Bunning is he's an innings eater. He can pitch on 3 days rest, though his ERA is around 4. Sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. You like that he's going to be pitching on 3 days rest, and you're willing to sacrifice the ERA of 4, and it's Las Vegas. So this is the one team that could make a move like that. And again, this fixes problems, fixes 2 problems at a time, because when you look at the overall math again, San Diego goes from 502.01, they lose the keeper, get a retired guy, 402.02. The idea, the sweetening of the trade for the Padres, helping the Padres out, is that they get Tony Cloninger. And Cloninger's better than Dukes. So Cloninger's better than Dukes, and Bunning's better than that guy. And that's sort of how it balances out why you don't need a token there. Again, the Padre number is now 402.02. When we go to Las Vegas, they were 302.03. They add a keeper. They lose a retiree. And they move pitcher for reliever. They're now 402.02. They're perfect. A couple more to do, and we'll do a wrap for tonight, because we like to space this out throughout the postseason. We start this and run through the spring, and we do a lot of analysis looking at cards. I'll be doing spreadsheet analysis like this, but I'll also be taking a look at the card sets as well in separate videos, along with running the Fall League. So the next team is Texas. And this is an embarrassment here. They have 7 keepers and only 1 retiree to start this round. Let's go see where they started in this round. Here's the Rangers. And sometimes this is a bad thing. When you have so many keepers like that, you know you're going to be in trouble. It's almost impossible to get the correct amount of money, if you want to call it, in return, and you're going to end up mostly getting tokens. 7 keepers, you can only keep 4. You got Mike Epstein, Frank Howard, Ken McMullen, Ed Stroud, Bill Hands, Daryl Knowles, Dick Bosman. The Rangers decided to keep Mike Epstein. Instead of Epstein would end up playing for Oakland, and the Rangers said, ain't no way that's happening. We're not going to let the Oakland A's get a dynasty that easy. So they're going to hold on to Epstein. The lovable Frank Howard, he's not going anywhere. They like Ed Stroud as a corner outfielder, also because no teams really desired him. And the 4th keeper was Bill Hands, mostly because he was acquired in an off-season trade because he was a 20-game winner in '69, and they want to keep the value of that trade. They want to extend the value of that trade into the future a little bit and not give it up in just 1 year. So the 3 guys, the 3 keepers they moved would be a third baseman, Ken McMullen, and they're not going to need a third baseman in the future because they have Dave Nelson, and also Toby Harrah will be a rookie soon for the Texas Rangers. Daryl Knowles, another guy who really never pitched for Texas until later in the 70s, because he was a Washington Senator here, and then he goes to Oakland, and again, They don't want Paul Lindblad or Daryl Knowles to end up on the Oakland A's. They're in the same division. So they moved Daryl Knowles, and they reluctantly moved Dick Bosman. So let's go see how it all transpired. In a series of trades, the first trade was a trade of left-handed relievers. They sent Daryl Knowles, an outstanding lefty reliever, to the other league, to an expansion team, Arizona, for a waived guy, Don McGinn. This is worth a token because Daryl Knowles will be pitching for a while. So Texas picks up a token in the trade. Arizona loses one. Arizona doesn't mind losing this token because they just want players, and they got one in Daryl Knowles. Okay, here is a big move. The Cincinnati Reds have Jim Maloney retiring. One of the things about the Reds last year is that only Don Gullett could pitch on 3 days rest. Not anymore. They're adding Dick Bosman as the number 2 starter in the rotation. Very good Dick Bosman, his 1970 card, to help the Reds get to the World Series, taking Jim Maloney's spot. Bosman never actually pitched for the Reds. This could be a 1-year rental, but this is the big move the Reds are hoping. They keep improving their starting pitching every year, something that they didn't particularly do very well, as Sparky Anderson mostly preferred having a great bullpen. But here in Strat, they're trying to add to this rotation. So Maloney to Bosman. Maloney slightly better than Bosman when you consider his 69 card versus this guy's 70 card, but Bosman's on 3 days rest. The Reds have to give up a token to get a guy as good as Bosman. So now the Rangers have 2 tokens, and the third trade that the Texas Rangers make, they find that Milwaukee would like to have a third baseman, Ken McMullen. One of the reasons why there are no tokens in this trade is that McMullen is just so-so. He would end up going to California and the Dodgers. They didn't want to, Texas was not about to give another division rival, California, a third baseman. The Dodgers will not need McMullen when they get Ron Cey to play third base. So to sweeten this trade, Texas gets Ted Savage for Rick Reichert as the active players. Savage better than Reichert, and then they get McMullen. So no net here. So after the 3 trades, the Rangers ended up getting rid of 2 keepers they couldn't keep, adding 2 tokens, and then they improve a corner outfielder Reichert with a guy who could play center field with better defense and better OPS. Savage has it all over Rick Reichert. So those are 3 straight moves to help the Texas Rangers. They didn't help Oakland, and they didn't help the California Angels. So that's great work for the Texas Rangers. And when we look at the overall token count, Texas goes perfectly to 40202. Milwaukee, adding a keeper, losing a waiver guy, goes to 40202. Arizona's almost there. They added a keeper, lost a waiver guy, so they're 30203. They still have to make one more move before the draft. And the other team that they dealt with was, let's see, who was the other team in Vegas? Oh, Cincinnati, that's right. And Cincinnati went from 30104 to 40103. So they have to make an incidental trade, or trade a retired player for a keeper. So, as a recap, we have the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, the 6th overall teams in the league have corrected their roster before the draft. Other teams get benefited from that, these teams. And we're going to stop right now. We'll pick it up with Atlanta and Ohio and these other teams the next time we do one of these draft prep videos. Thanks for checking this stuff out. I appreciate your comments. Hope this isn't overly confusing, but it's pretty important to working the carryover league to make it as competitive and interesting as possible. And it's kind of a year-round project. Because it's always fun in the off season, analyze the cards, look at the data, and figure out ways to improve the league. Thanks for checking it all out. We'll see you next time.